So graphing a decimal number on a number line. So we can take a number line. So this can be made up of real numbers right here. And how do we graph them? Well, we typically, if we are going to draw a line, we like to, in the middle, allocate kind of a division between negative and positive numbers. Now, negative numbers go in this particular direction, and positive numbers will go in this particular direction. It is much easier to kind of draw out the positive numbers. So if I would zoom in here, let's say only on the positive side right here, and I can start numbering these. So depending, I'll try to keep this, kind of symmetrical. So it will be 1, let's say I have 2, and this keeps going. That's 3, 4. Ideally they're supposed to be equally spaced apart there. And it continues on. Now, if you wanted to plot just a regular straight number, whatever that number might be, if it's an integer number or a natural number, in this case, in terms of being positive, so like a number like, let's say, 5 or maybe 2 or something like that, well, in those cases, what I do is I just simply, so if I take the 2, I would slot it within here, and I can label it as 2 with a particular dot. If I wanted to take the 5, so obviously the 5 would have been equally spaced, so it would have been somewhere over there, and that would have been 5. So that's not a problem. Now, if they're decimals, if it's, for instance, 2.7, then we are starting to guess a little bit. But we do know that it's going to be, or lie, somewhere in between this 2 and then this 3. So if I go somewhere along within here, so 2.7, so if I would kind of zoom in here, well, I can kind of approximate, all right, so this is going to be around half, so 2.5, and then 2.7 is going to be, a little bit probably closer to 2.5 than it is to 3, and then, I can label it as 2.7. So those are positive numbers, and I can do the same thing. Let's say if I wanted to put 4.1, all right, so I would go to 4, so I know that's going to be somewhere between 4 and 5, and it's going to be most likely a little bit closer to 4. If between 4 and 5 or between any other number, you have more divisions, then you can be a little bit more accurate. But if it's labeled the line just in terms of natural numbers or maybe whole numbers as a component, then you have to do a little bit of guessing. Now, the problem that I find that students sometimes run into is when you go on the opposite side, and there, you start trying to graph negative numbers. So negative numbers go in the opposite direction. So as you carry these through, so I'm going to kind of label them across, and then they start here, so -1, -2, -3, -4, and so on. Now, of course, we have -1 is bigger than -2. But the confusion always lies because we're so used to 1 and 2, people think that 2 is bigger than 1. But on the number line, remember that when you're going to the left, those numbers become smaller and smaller. So -4 is going to be definitely less than -3, and it's going to be less than -2, and so on. And now if you want to plot, so if you are going to be plotting these out, and if they're just integers, so let's say like -3, well, then it's very simple to try to blob them right on the spot. But what if it was -3.6? So in this case, the way that you're going to be graphing, so unlike the positive side, where for instance between 2 and 3, you started at 2 and then it was 2.1, 2.2, and so on up to 3, in this case you're going from the right to the left. So if I zoom in here, so if I wanted to break this down, okay, into smaller and smaller pieces, so what I'm going to try to do is, okay, I'll try to take this thing right here and I'll blow it up for you. So let me kind of blow that up and redraw the line, but kind of zoomed in. So if I would draw this, and let's say this was -4, and then this was -3, then remember that negative numbers, so if you have, so this would have been, for instance, -3.1. And then right here, it would have been -3.2. and then it would have been negative 3.3, and so on until, you know, this was, let's say, negative 3.9. So what you should notice with the negatives is that they're kind of going in this direction, right? So that's what we have. So if I wanted to get this in there, so negative 3.6, I mean on this one, so it would have been probably, you know, somewhere along here. That's where I would plot it. And then in here, so, you know, if I was going in here, okay, so this is kind of where I would have put my negative 3.6. So don't forget that those negatives, that's how they go. They go in this direction, and the positives go in this direction. All right, so that's pretty much it in terms of graphing. You know, you can try these. If they're plotted already and then you have to read them out, then it makes it sometimes a little bit easier, but don't get caught. All right, so for instance, don't get caught with something like this where, you know, the line goes in this direction. Let's say if this was negative 5, this was negative 4, and then they plotted something right here. You know, so although you might not know all of these, but if you were approximating, I often catch students and they'll say that this is negative 5.1 because they're so used to going in this direction that they feel like, oh, that's going to be negative 5.1. No. Because negative 5.1 is on this side, and this would have been most likely around negative 4.9. All right, so keep that in mind when you are dealing with the negatives. With the positives, it's a little bit easier. Okay, thanks for watching. See you in a future video. Bye, everybody.